It was an ordinary afternoon, or at least that's how it started. The winter sun was setting, casting a pale light over the snowy streets. I was sipping tea, lost in my thoughts, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end spoke quickly, but the words hit me like a punch in the gut. "Mrs. Grace, your daughter Kaylee has been rushed to the hospital. Both she and her unborn child are in critical condition." I froze. The OBGYN was calling, and I knew something terrible had happened. My mind raced. Kaylee, my sweet girl, was pregnant and had been receiving regular checkups. Everything had been fine, but now I was being told she had collapsed outside, in the snow, just a few steps from her home. A neighbor had found her, unconscious, and called for an ambulance. Why had she been outside? What had happened? The shock of it was too much to process. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door, praying as I drove the 2 hours to the hospital. Please, God, protect my daughter and her baby. I arrived at the hospital, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The doctor met me in the waiting room, his face grim. He explained that Kaylee had been unconscious when they brought her in, and her condition was worsening. She was conscious for a brief moment, the doctor said. She insisted we contact you instead of her husband. Those words echoed in my head. Why hadn't she wanted Blake, her husband, to know? I was led to her room, my legs trembling beneath me. When I saw her lying there, pale and still, my heart shattered. I clung to her hand, whispering her name, willing her to wake up. But as the minutes passed, the hope I had been holding on to slipped away. Kaylee, my beautiful daughter, was gone. She never woke up again. My world crumbled. The room spun, and I collapsed into a chair. My daughter, who had been so full of life, was gone, and I didn't understand why. How could this have happened? She had been excited about the baby. She was careful with her health. What could have possibly led her to collapse outside in the snow? Blake. My thoughts turned to him. From the beginning I had doubts about him. He was a brash man, always putting himself first, even on their wedding day. He never treated Kaylee the way she deserved, and he certainly never treated me with respect. I had often wondered if Kaylee was truly happy with him, but I kept those thoughts to myself, trusting that my daughter knew what was best for her. Now I wasn't so sure. The neighbor who found Kaylee had come to the hospital too, and when they told me what had happened, I felt sick. Kaylee had been locked out of her own home. Blake had taken the house key and gone out drinking, leaving her in the freezing cold to shovel snow. A pregnant woman, nearing the end of her pregnancy, left outside in such dangerous weather conditions. Why would he do such a thing? I knew I had to call Blake. He was Kaylee's husband, after all. But when I finally reached him, his slurred speech told me all I needed to know. He was drunk, and worse than that, he didn't even realize the gravity of what had happened. "Kaylee, is that you?" he asked, mistaking me for her. "Come pick me up, the snow's cleared, right?" When I told him the truth, that Kaylee was gone, his reaction was not what I expected. He didn't believe me. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "Who is this? Stop joking around." I bit back my tears, my hands shaking as I held the phone. "It's Grace, Kaylee's mother. She collapsed, Blake. She's dead." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line, but then Blake spoke again, his voice full of disbelief. "That's not possible. She was just fine this morning." "She wasn't fine," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "She was locked outside in the snow because you took the house key. She couldn't get back inside. She collapsed, Blake. The neighbor found her." His voice shifted, growing defensive. "She was shoveling snow. How do you know about that?" "The neighbor told me," I replied, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "They found her, Blake. They found her because you left her outside in the cold. She lost consciousness, and now she's gone." Blake's tone hardened. "That's not my fault. She wanted to shovel the snow. She could have stayed inside if she wanted. "Stop lying," I shouted, unable to contain my fury any longer. "You left her out there. You took the house key and went drinking. You were supposed to protect her, and now she's dead." There was a long pause, and then Blake muttered something under his breath. "I can't deal with this right now. I'm too drunk." He hung up before I could say another word. I stared at the phone in disbelief. How could he be so heartless? How could he not care that his wife and unborn child were gone? I didn't want to call him back, and frankly, I didn't know what to do next. My daughter was dead, and her husband couldn't care less. It was then that I realized I would have to handle this on my own. I couldn't bear to return to my empty house that night, so I took a taxi to Kaylee's house instead. When I walked inside, the silence was overwhelming. The kitchen was half finished. She had been preparing dinner when she left to shovel the snow. I imagined her there, chopping vegetables, humming softly to herself, excited about the baby that was coming soon. Now, that future had been stolen from her, and from me. As I cleaned up the kitchen, I found something tucked away in a cupboard, Kaylee's diary. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, unsure if I was ready to know what she had written, but I had to understand. I had to know what my daughter had been going through. What I read broke my heart all over again. Kaylee had been suffering in silence for months. After she got pregnant, her health had declined, and she had to quit her job. Blake had become cruel, berating her for being a useless wife who didn't contribute to the household. He forced her to cook, clean, and even shovel snow, all while she was struggling with her pregnancy. He never let her rest, and he threatened her with divorce if she ever tried to leave him. But the most chilling part was the last entry, written just the day before she collapsed. Blake told me to clean the house today, even though I was too tired. I couldn't finish, and he got angry. He threw the dinner I made on the floor. "I'm worried the baby isn't getting enough nutrition. I don't know what to do." Tears streamed down my face as I read those words. My daughter had been suffering right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. I hadn't known. If I had, I would have taken her away from that house, away from Blake's cruelty. But now it was too late. Kaylee was gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring her back. Or was there? I thought about Blake, about his indifference to Kaylee's death, and I felt a fire ignite in my chest. I couldn't let him get away with this. He had taken my daughter from me, and he had to pay. But I knew I couldn't rely on Kaylee's diary alone to prove his abuse. I needed more. The next day, I began gathering evidence. I spoke to the neighbor who had found Kaylee, and I collected statements from them. I also talked to the doctor who had treated her at the hospital. They all confirmed the same thing. Blake had neglected her, and his neglect had led to her death. But it wasn't until I found the dashcam footage from the neighbor's car that I knew I had enough to confront him. The camera had captured everything. Blake leaving the house, locking Kaylee out, and walking away without a second glance. It was all there, clear as day. I called Blake, and when he answered, I wasted no time. "Blake, I have proof. I have dash cam footage from the neighbor's car showing you leaving Kaylee outside. I'm calling the police." Blake's voice wavered for the first time. Wait, we can talk about this. You don't need to call the police, it was an accident. I didn't mean for this to happen." "An accident," I spat. "You left your pregnant wife out in the snow and went drinking. That's not an accident, Blake. That's neglect." He tried to backpedal, offering me money from Kaylee's life insurance. "We can settle this, Grace. I'll give you half of the payout. Just don't go to the police." I hung up without another word. I couldn't believe his audacity. He thought money could fix this? Number, I didn't want his money. I wanted justice for Kaylee. On the day of Kaylee's funeral, Blake showed up, pretending to be the grieving husband. But as I stood at the podium to give my speech, I knew I couldn't stay silent. "Thank you all for being here to honor my daughter," I began. "But there is something you need to know." I told the whole truth, how Blake had locked Kaylee outside, how he had neglected her, and how his actions had led to her death. The room fell into shocked silence, and I saw Blake's face pale. He tried to interrupt, but I ignored him, reading from Kaylee's diary. When I finished, Blake stood up, feigning outrage. "She's lying!" he shouted. "Kaylee wanted to shovel the snow. This is all a misunderstanding." But no one believed him. His own family looked at him with disgust, and the murmurs in the room grew louder. Finally, I pulled out the dash cam footage. "I have proof," I said, holding up the SD card. "Everything you did is recorded." Blake's face turned white as a sheet. He knew it was over. The police arrived shortly after and took Blake away in handcuffs. As they led him out, he turned to me, begging for forgiveness. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he cried. "Please, Grace, I'm sorry." But I had no sympathy left for him. He had destroyed my daughter's life, and now he would pay the price. Kaylee's baby, however, was born healthy. My grandchild, a piece of Kaylee that would live on. I decided to raise the baby myself, pouring all the love I had for Kaylee into this child. Blake would never know the joy of being a father. Kaylee, my dear, you can rest in peace now. Justice has been served, and your child will grow up surrounded by love. Blake will rot in prison for what he did, but your legacy will live on. And as I held my grandchild in my arms, I knew that despite the pain, there was still hope. For Kaylee, for her baby, and for me.